Hi and welcome to Studio Vinden and the Atmos Guerilla Mixing Ep3, where I will speak purely about monitoring and speaker setup. The hashtag Atmos Guerilla Mixing is just an idea to collect a lot of information on Atmos, but not necessarily adhering to the strict regulations or recommendations that Dolby has on an Atmos room. So what I want to see if I can upgrade my stereo mix room into an Atmos mix room for under or approximately $1,000. As this is the first time my channel has had over 100 subscribers, I'd just like to say thank you for subscribing and also for all of the comments in the comment section. I've tried to answer most of them so far, but with the technical detail of kind of the monitoring setup and so on, I think maybe I will take your comments into consideration and maybe do a Q&A episode in the future. But anyway, let's get going with Atmos Guerilla Mixing Episode 3, the monitoring setup. So first of all, I'm not going to change location. I have a mix room that sounds good and I want to expand that into the Atmos territory. I've chosen to go with a 704 system. That means 7 speakers in the ear plane and 4 speakers on top and 0 subwoofers. It seems like the subwoofer or the LFE channel is not used very much in the Atmos music mixing. It's heavily used in the cinematic world of Atmos, but in music mixing it doesn't seem to matter that much. And given that my main monitors are full range and I don't have a subwoofer in the stereo setup, I've chosen not to include a subwoofer also in the Atmos setup. So my main stereo monitors are the Dynaudio Lead 48s, and I really like them. So my goal is to expand into the Dynaudio Lead universe and add speakers from that range. And then I will use some other speakers in the non-critical areas, so to speak. And after listening to a lot of panels and watching YouTube videos on the Atmos subject, mostly moderated by Andrew Sheps, by the way, it seems like there is a consensus that the stereo wall is still pretty important. Most of the Atmos mixing done today is stereo first and Atmos as a secondary step. And that's also what I will do. So I've reasoned like this. I want the side speakers to be of the same tonality, but the spacing in my room makes it impossible for me to have these really big monitors. And it's also a question of budget, I guess. I've also thought a lot about the center speaker. It seems that some Atmos mixers don't use the center speaker at all, but most of them seem to kind of sneak it in under the elements of the mix that they want to have really centered and focused in the front wall of sound. So even given my budget, I reasoned that I think the center speaker can be a good addition, but if I want to use it for anything, it's going to be for pretty bass heavy things, or at least very full range things like the vocals or the kick drum or the bass guitar or whatever. I'm not sure. But anyway, what I want to make sure is that I match the tonality and the bass response of my main monitors. So as a center speaker, I've gone with the Dynaudio Lead 8, which is kind of a smaller speaker than the Lead 48s, and it's not 3-way, it's a 2-way speaker, but it has the same 8-inch driver as my main monitors, which I think is maybe the most important in this aspect. So with the 5 kind of left side to right side front wall speakers decided, all of the Dynaudio Lead series, then comes the rear surrounds and the top surrounds. So from a creative perspective, but as well as from a budget perspective, I think those are the speakers that we can compromise a bit with. So I actually went into the attic and looked around and saw what I had. So I had 2 old pairs of speakers there. So I basically put up these speakers beside my main monitors, played the same audio through all of the 3 speakers, and from the 2 contestants, I just picked the speaker that was the closest in tonality to the Dynaudio. And it actually happened to be quite similar in tonality, which was a great thing. So I chose an old pair of Dux home stereo speakers that were originally my mom's. So lastly, the top speakers. And those were actually my biggest concern, as I have a slanted ceiling on both the left and right side. So I didn't want the speakers to take up too much room. So what I did was I actually looked for flat speakers, as flat as possible, and I found exactly what I was looking for. A cheap pair of really thin passive speakers that can be mounted in the ceiling. And I obviously got 2 pairs of those speakers. So the rear surrounds and the top speakers are all passive, so I looked in the attic again, and I knew that I had an old cinema receiver that hadn't seen much use in a couple of years, which is perfect in this case because it has 8 channels of analog pre-input. So I'm basically using it as a 6-channel amplifier. So regarding speaker placement, I won't go into angles and distances and such. There is a great Dolby document that discusses all of this, and I'll put a link up to it in the description box. However, I thought I'd say a few words about some really important things when setting up an Atmos speaker environment. The first one of these is level calibration. I basically put up a measurement mic exactly in the listening position. This mic was then sent to Room EQ Wizard as an input, and I used the SPL meter in Room EQ Wizard to monitor the SPL level from the speakers. I then basically played pink noise from each discrete speaker, making sure that the SPL meter showed the same level for all tracks. After the level calibration, I did the time alignment, which is a bit more involved, but the theory is quite straightforward. So what I did was I basically played a very, very short sound, in this case just part of a metronome click. This metronome click was both routed back into the audio interface, so essentially just a cable from an output to an input of the interface, and this signal acts as a reference. Then simultaneously I play the same click and I route it to each speaker one by one, and I recall all of these back into the DAW. If you look at the recordings of this click for all of the different speakers, you will find that one of the clicks has the longest delay. So basically the difference from the reference to the recorded click. This will be your reference. And then you have to insert delay on all of the other outputs so they match up, and the time from the reference click to the actual recorded click is the same for all speakers. So it's a bit of a technical workout, but once you have it routed and set up, you can always go back and redo the time alignment procedure. So what I'm basically saying is that I don't have a perfect room, I don't have a perfect setup, so I'm using what I have. And the key to this is to be really serious with the level calibration and the time alignment, as all of this data, the level differences between different speakers and the time differences between different speakers, I put all of this into a specific plugin in Cubase called Mixer Delay, which is placed after the renderer. So that is purely for my monitoring. So speaking of monitoring in Cubase, I won't go into details on the Cubase specifics of Atmos. Lots of people have done that much better than I can, but I have implemented a few small things that I thought I'd share, which at least makes everything much easier to me. First, I have a Stream Deck controller in my setup, and anytime I go into Cubase, the Stream Deck controller becomes a speaker solo switch. So I mapped the control room speaker selector to the Stream Deck, which works great. Apart from the small bug that Steinberg in Cubase 12 haven't included both front and back top speaker solo buttons as key commands. So I can't use it with the Stream Deck right now. Please fix that, Steinberg. The other thing is that I need a level control for all the speakers at the same time. So Cubase has a great control room feature which controls the level of all of the 11 outputs at the same time. But I don't want to use a mouse to set the level. So I basically mapped my existing MIDI controller, which I use mostly as an SSL EQ controller. So I mapped one of the knobs on my MIDI controller and I mapped it to the control room level, and it works great. So with all this in place, I'm ready to really get my hands dirty with the actual Atmos mixing. And I've also been listening to a lot of binaural Atmos in my Tidal account, and I'm not overwhelmed, to say the least. I think the binaural translation from the multi-speaker Atmos mix seems kind of difficult to get right because there are so many really questionable Atmos binaural mixes out there. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. Thanks a million for watching, and if you have any questions, just put in a comment in the comment section, and I'll either answer it there or, as I said, do a full Q&A episode. I'd also love to hear from you about your own Atmos setups and what your main priorities have been regarding budget and room size and speaker setup and so on. So please, let's have a conversation about this. Anyway, thanks a lot and cheers.